Humans can't love us. Alien girl defied her clan after human man exposed their dark secret. The research station Kepler-7 floated in the neutral zone between human and Velkine space, a gleaming structure of metal and glass where two species attempted to understand each other. Zira stood at the observation deck, her pale blue skin shimmering slightly under the artificial lights as she watched the stars beyond. Her people, the Velkine, had always found comfort in the infinite expanse of space, but today she felt only anxiety. She was about to meet her new assignment, a human xenopsychologist named Dr. Marcus Chen. The Council of Elders had briefed her extensively about the dangers of working with humans. They were psychic voids, empty spaces in the universe where the communion could not reach. Every Velkine child learned this truth from the moment they joined the collective consciousness. Humans caused pain, a severing sensation that felt like being cut off from the great neural network that connected all Velkine minds across the galaxy. Zira touched her temple gently, feeling the familiar hum of 10 billion thoughts flowing through her consciousness. The communion was always there, a constant presence that told her she belonged, that she was never alone, that she was part of something greater than herself. The thought of being near a human, of feeling that connection weaken, terrified her. The door behind her slid open with a soft hiss, and she turned to see him enter. Marcus Chen was tall for a human, with dark hair graying at the temples and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He extended his hand in the human gesture of greeting, then quickly withdrew it, apparently remembering that physical contact with Velkine was considered inappropriate. "Ms. Zira," he said warmly, "it's an honor to finally meet you. I've read all your papers on Velkine social structures. Fascinating work. I look forward to our collaboration, though I must maintain proper boundaries, as you understand. Most of our work can be done through remote communication." Zira would analyze Velkine cultural data while Marcus examined human psychological patterns, and they would share their findings through video channels and written reports. The work was productive, if distant. Zira found herself surprised by Marcus's insights, the way he could see patterns in Velkine behavior that even she had missed. There was something refreshing about his perspective, untainted by the communion's collective interpretations. Then came the day that changed everything. An unexpected solar flare disrupted the station systems, causing a cascade of failures throughout the eastern wing. Emergency protocols sealed sections automatically to prevent decompression. Zira had been collecting physical samples from a laboratory when the alarms blared. She ran toward the exit, but the doors slammed shut just as she reached them. The lights flickered once, twice, then switched to emergency mode, bathing everything in a dim red glow. "Is anyone there?" she called out, her voice echoing in the suddenly silent corridor. "Zira," Marcus's voice came from somewhere in the darkness. "I'm here. I was in the storage room when the lockdown happened." She reached out to the communion, seeking comfort from her people, but the station's damaged systems were interfering with the connection. The familiar hum in her mind grew faint and distant. "The emergency systems say the lockdown will last at least 72 hours, Marcus continued, his voice calm despite the situation. "They need to verify structural integrity before they can open the blast doors." "Are you all right?" But as the minutes passed, she felt nothing except the gradual fading of the communion's presence as the damaged systems continued to block her connection. And then, something remarkable happened. For the first time in her life, Zira's mind became quiet. The constant background noise of billions of thoughts, the endless stream of emotions and ideas and memories that flowed through every Velkine's consciousness, began to fade. It was like stepping out of a crowded market into a peaceful garden. Her own thoughts, singular and clear, rose to the surface without being immediately absorbed into the collective understanding. "Zira," Marcus's voice held concern now, "please talk to me. Are you in pain?" "I don't understand. I was told that being near humans would hurt." "It feels different, strange, but not painful. The communion is fading because of the damaged systems, and I thought I would panic, but instead I feel." She struggled to find the word. "Peaceful." Marcus asked about the communion, about how it felt to be constantly connected to billions of minds. Zira described it as best she could, explaining how every Velkine was born into the network, how they learned not just from their own experiences, but from the collective memory of their entire species. "But don't you ever want privacy?" Marcus asked gently. Don't you ever want thoughts that are just yours? And yet, sitting here in the quiet darkness with only her own thoughts for company, she found herself considering the possibility. I never knew I could, she admitted. I never knew what it felt like to think something without immediately sharing it with everyone else. Without the communion constantly shaping her emotions, she found she had preferences that were entirely her own. She liked the way Marcus laughed at his own jokes. She enjoyed the silence between their conversations. She appreciated the way he treated her as an individual rather than as a representative of her entire species. On the third day, Marcus shared his theory. What if the Velkine leadership has been wrong about humans? What if we don't cause pain at all? What if what you're experiencing is what individual consciousness feels like, and your people have simply forgotten because you've been connected for so long? A small voice in her mind, her own voice, whispered that he might be right. The elders had always taught that humans were dangerous, that contact with them would lead to suffering and eventual death as a Velkine slowly lost their connection to the communion. But she felt more alive now than she ever had before. When the rescue teams finally cut through the blast doors, Zira felt the communion rush back into her mind like a tidal wave. The sudden influx of billions of thoughts was overwhelming after 3 days of relative silence. She gasped, steadying herself against the wall. Are you all right? One of the Velkine rescuers asked, his concern flowing through the network to her. We were so worried. Being trapped with a human must have been terrible. He glanced over his shoulder at her, and in his eyes she saw understanding. Back in her quarters, Zira couldn't settle. The communion buzzed with the usual flow of thoughts and emotions, but now it felt suffocating rather than comforting. She had tasted something different, something the elders said was impossible. She had to know the truth. Late that night, Zira accessed the station's archives, searching for historical records of human Velkine first contact. The publicly available information was sparse and heavily sanitized, but she had learned a few tricks over her years as a researcher. She dug deeper, following obscure references and coded citations. What she found made her blood run cold. Buried in restricted files that should have been far beyond her security clearance were reports from 300 years ago, from the first generation of Velkine who had encountered humanity. They spoke of young Velkine who formed friendships with humans, who sought out their company, who reported feeling liberated and individual in their presence. The reports detailed how these Velkine began questioning the elders' authority, began wanting lives separate from the communion's constant oversight. And then, abruptly, all such reports stopped. In their place were medical documents describing a new condition called severance syndrome, a supposedly dangerous psychological state where Velkine became addicted to isolation. The treatment was always the same: increased connection to the communion, mandatory integration sessions, and permanent separation from human contact. Zira's hands trembled as she read. The implications were staggering. Humans didn't cause pain. They granted immunity from the elders' surveillance. The entire foundation of Velkine-human relations was built on a lie. Before she could process what she had learned, her door chimed. She quickly closed the files and opened the door to find 2 Velkine elders standing in the corridor, their expressions grave. Zira of the communion, the taller one said formally, you have been flagged for concerning behavior. Your time in isolation with the human has compromised your connection to the collective good. You are hereby summoned before the council. The council chamber was a perfect circle, its walls lined with holographic displays showing the collective consciousness flowing like rivers of light across the galaxy. 12 elders sat in elevated seats, their advanced age apparent in the deep violet hue their skin had taken over centuries. Zira stood in the center, feeling the weight of their combined attention pressing down on her through the communion. Zira, the head elder spoke, his voice echoing both aloud and through the mental network. We have monitored your recent activities with concern. Your exposure to the human has created instability in your connection to us. We can feel your doubts, your questions. This is the beginning of severance syndrome. Perhaps our understanding of humans needs to be reconsidered. Voices flooded her mind, thousands upon thousands of thoughts and emotions crashing into her consciousness like waves against a shore. She gasped, falling to her knees as the overwhelming presence of the communion threatened to drown out her individual thoughts entirely. This is what happens when you stray too far, another elder said coldly. The communion keeps us strong, keeps us united. Your desire for isolation is a sickness, and we can cure it by reminding you of your place within the whole. When they finally released her, Zira could barely remember her own name beneath the crushing weight of collective identity. The message was clear. Step out of line, and they would ensure she never had a moment of peace again. You are reassigned effective immediately, the head elder declared. You will work only with Velkin personnel from now on. The human Dr. Chen has been informed that you are unwell and require medical leave. You will not contact him again. Do you understand? As she lay on her bed, the communion still buzzing loudly in her mind, she thought of Marcus and the peaceful silence she had experienced with him. That memory was her own, untouched by the collective, and she clung to it like a lifeline. Marcus Chen sat in his office, staring at the official message on his screen. Zira had been recalled for health reasons and would not be returning to their project. The explanation felt wrong. He had seen her in those 3 days they were trapped together, had watched her blossom into someone more vibrant and alive than the careful, distant person she had been before. This sudden illness made no sense. He began investigating, reaching out to colleagues who had worked with Velkin in the past. What he discovered disturbed him. Nearly every human who had formed a genuine friendship with a Velkin reported the same pattern. The relationship would deepen, the Velkin would become more independent and questioning, and then suddenly they would be transferred away and all contact would cease. The official explanations varied, but the pattern was unmistakable. Marcus found an elderly diplomat named Sarah Williams who had served during the early years of human-Velkin contact. She was in her 90s now, living in a retirement community on Earth, but her memory was sharp as she spoke to him via video call. I had a friend named Torek, Sarah said, her eyes distant with memory. He was young for a Velkin, only about 60 years old. We worked together on a cultural exchange program, and he told me things he said he had never told anyone. He said that being around humans made him feel like himself for the first time. Then one day, he was just gone. They told me he had developed a mental illness from too much isolation from his people. I tried to find him for years, but it was like he had been erased. I had my suspicions, but what could I do? The Velkin are a powerful species, and Earth needed their alliance. I filed reports, but they went nowhere. Eventually, I retired and tried to forget. She leaned closer to the camera. But if you're asking these questions, Dr. Chen, it means someone else has experienced what Torek did. Please, don't let them erase her too. Finally, he found a young Velkin technician named Rel who worked in the station's maintenance department. Rel was part of a newer generation, only 30 years connected to the communion, and Marcus sensed a curiosity in him that the older Velkin seemed to lack. I need to send a message to someone, Marcus told Rel carefully. Someone who the elders don't want me to contact. I think she's in trouble, and I think the reason she's in trouble is because your leadership is hiding something important. I could lose my position, I could be punished. But I believe the Velkin people deserve to know the truth about humans, and about what your elders have been hiding for 300 years. What truth? Marcus explained everything he had learned about the historical patterns, about humans granting mental privacy rather than causing pain. Rel listened in silence, and Marcus could see the young Velkin struggling with information that contradicted everything he had been taught. Finally, Rel nodded. I will deliver your message, but Dr. Chen, if you're right about this, if the elders have truly been lying, then what you're starting could tear our entire society apart. Sometimes, Marcus said quietly, things need to fall apart before they can be rebuilt into something better. The message reached Zira through her personal terminal late at night. It was brief. I know they're lying. I know you're suffering. You're not alone. Those simple words gave her the strength she desperately needed. She wasn't crazy. The peace she had felt wasn't a sickness, it was freedom. Carefully, using every bit of skill she possessed, Zira began reaching out to other young Velkin. She found them in research stations, on colony worlds, in places where the elders' direct influence was weaker. She didn't tell them everything at once. She simply asked questions. Had any of them ever wondered what it would be like to have truly private thoughts? Had they ever felt suffocated by the constant presence of the communion? Did they know about the Velkin who had formed friendships with humans in the past? Slowly, a network formed. Young Velkin who had doubts, who had questions, who wanted something more than the life the elders had prescribed for them. They called themselves the Seekers, and they met in secret through encrypted channels that the Communion couldn't monitor. But secrets that large cannot stay hidden forever. 6 months after Zira's encounter with Marcus, the elders discovered the Seeker network. The response was swift and brutal. The council called for a galaxy-wide broadcast, an event that happened only during moments of species-wide crisis. Every Velkin across known space would be tuned in, their attention focused on the council's words. Zira watched the preparations from her quarters, her heart's pounding. She knew what was coming. The elders would present an ultimatum, submit to their authority or be cast out from the Communion forever. It was the nuclear option, the one punishment that could still terrify the Velkin into compliance. But then Zira received another message, this time from Rel. Dr. Chen says to trust him. Be ready. Those who call themselves Seekers have been infected with the desire for isolation, for severance from our beautiful collective consciousness. Today, we give them a choice. Submit to intensive reconnection therapy, or the Velkin will sever all ties with humanity and relocate our people to a sector where this contagion cannot spread. If the Seekers didn't surrender, the entire species would be punished by losing their alliance with one of the galaxy's most innovative civilizations. The elders were betting that the Seekers wouldn't be willing to cost their people so much. But they had miscalculated. Before the head elder could continue, the broadcast signal was hijacked. The screen split, showing not just the council chamber but dozens of locations across the galaxy. In each location stood a Velkin and a human, side by side. And there, at the center of the grid, stood Zira and Marcus. People of the Velkin Communion, Zira's voice rang out clear and strong. For 300 years, we have been told that humans are psychic voids, that contact with them causes pain and leads to madness. Today, I stand before you to tell you the truth. Humans don't cause pain, they grant freedom. The records of young Velkin forming friendships with humans, of reports describing liberation and individuality, of the sudden creation of severance syndrome, as a diagnosis that conveniently appeared just as the elders were losing control. The elders have lied to us because they fear what we might become if we had the choice to step away from the Communion, Zira continued. They fear that if we experience true individuality, true privacy of thought, we might choose it. And they are right to fear because we deserve that choice. But we also know the value of individual thought, of ideas that are your own before they become collective. We offer partnership, not replacement. We offer you the chance to experience both connection and solitude, to find balance between the individual and the whole. Other Velkin began to speak, sharing their experiences with human friends, describing the peace they had found, the creativity that emerged when they could. Think thoughts that were temporarily their own. Humans spoke too, elderly ones like Sarah who remembered Velkin friends lost to the elders' lies, researchers who had documented the pattern of separation and erasure. The broadcast lasted for hours, and across the galaxy, the Velkin Communion erupted into chaos. Some were angry, calling the Seekers traitors. Others were curious, wondering if what they had been taught was really true. Still others felt a spark of recognition, remembering moments when they had wished for privacy, for thoughts that were theirs alone. The elders tried to shut down the broadcast, tried to flood the Communion with their own narrative, but it was too late. The truth was out, spreading like wildfire through the collective consciousness. Young Velkin began demanding answers. Parents who had lost children to mysterious reassignments started asking questions. Scientists began examining the historical records with fresh eyes. In the end, the Velkin Communion didn't collapse. Instead, it evolved. The species split not into enemies, but into different ways of living. The traditionalists chose to remain in constant connection, valuing the security and unity of the collective above all else. The Seekers established new colonies where Velkin could learn to balance communion and solitude, often living alongside humans and other species. Zira became a leader among the Seekers, working with Marcus to develop new technologies that allowed Velkin to voluntarily modulate their connection to the Communion. They could join the network when they wished to share knowledge or experience collective emotion, but they could also step away when they needed privacy or wanted to develop ideas independently. The hardest part was learning to trust themselves. Velkin, who had never made a decision without consulting the communion, had to learn what it meant to choose their own path. There were mistakes and confusion and moments of doubt. But there was also growth, creativity, and a flowering of individual expression that the Velkin had not experienced in millennia. One evening, nearly a year after the broadcast, Zira and Marcus sat together on the observation deck of a new research station, this one designed to house both humans and seekers. Zira had just spent an hour connected to the communion, sharing her latest research with colleagues across the galaxy, and now she sat in peaceful silence, enjoying the quiet of her own mind. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked. "Everything you gave up, everything you risked. The communion is still there when I want it, when I need the wisdom and support of my people. But now I also have this." She gestured to the space between them, the comfortable silence of two individuals simply being together. "I have friendship that I chose freely, thoughts that are mine to share or keep, and the knowledge that my life is my own. How could I regret that?" They were growing up in a galaxy where the barriers between species were falling, where different ways of thinking were celebrated rather than feared. The elders had been right about one thing: humans had changed the Velkin forever, but it wasn't destruction they brought. It was the simple, radical gift of choice, and the understanding that love and connection meant more when they were freely given rather than biologically mandated. In the end, that was the most human thing of all. The new colony on Stellara 9 was barely a year old, but it was already thriving in ways that surprised even its founders. The settlement stretched across a valley between two mountain ranges, its buildings a blend of Velkin organic architecture and human geometric designs. Here, seekers and humans lived side by side, creating something unprecedented in galactic history. A truly integrated community where two fundamentally different forms of consciousness learned from each other daily. Zira walked through the central plaza, nodding to neighbors both Velkin and human. Children of both species played together near a fountain, their laughter echoing off the surrounding buildings. She still marveled at how natural this all felt now, how quickly the fear and separation of centuries had melted away once the truth was known. But she also knew that not everyone in the galaxy was happy about these changes. Marcus met her at the entrance to the council building, his expression troubled. "We've received another formal complaint from the traditionalists," he said, handing her a data pad. "They're petitioning the Galactic Assembly to restrict seeker colonies, claiming we're violating the natural order of Velkin society." Led by some of the former elders, they had spent the past year fighting the seeker movement at every turn, using political pressure and social manipulation to try to force things back to the way they were. They painted the seekers as victims of human manipulation, as sick individuals who needed to be saved from themselves. "They're arguing that seeker children should be removed from their parents and raised in the communion," Zira said, her voice barely controlled. "They want to take our children, Marcus. They're arguing that cognitive liberty is a fundamental right, that no species should be forced to remain in a collective consciousness against their will." The hearing at the Galactic Assembly was scheduled for the following month, and Zira knew it would determine the future of everything they had built. If the traditionalists won, if the Assembly decided that the elders had the right to enforce communion connection on all Velkin, then the seeker colonies would be declared illegal. Families would be torn apart. Everything they had fought for would be lost. That night, Zira sat with a group of young seekers who had been born into the communion, but had chosen to leave it as soon as they were old enough to make that decision. They met weekly to discuss the challenges of learning to live as individuals after a lifetime of collective consciousness. A young woman named Tessa spoke first. "I still hear the communion sometimes, like an echo in my mind. When I'm stressed or scared, I reach for it instinctively, forgetting that I chose to step away. It's hard to trust myself to handle things alone." Choosing individuality doesn't mean isolation. It means choosing your connections rather than having them forced upon you. These young people were pioneers, navigating territory that no Velkin had explored in thousands of years. They were making mistakes and learning from them, growing in ways that the communion had never allowed. But they were also vulnerable, still figuring out who they were without the constant presence of billions of other minds. "The traditionalists don't understand what we've found here," Zira said when there was a pause in the conversation. "They think we've lost something precious. But we haven't lost the communion. We've gained the ability to appreciate it as a choice rather than a prison. That's what we need to help the Galactic Assembly understand. They gathered testimony from seekers across dozens of colonies, documenting the positive changes in their lives. They brought in experts on consciousness and neural networks, philosophers who could speak to the ethics of collective versus individual minds, and even traditionalist Velkin who, despite their disagreements, admitted that the seekers deserved the right to live as they chose. But the traditionalists were preparing their own case. They had resources that the seekers lacked, centuries of diplomatic connections and political influence. They brought forward Velkin, who claimed to have been harmed by separation from the communion, individuals who described feeling lost and broken without the constant mental connection. Some of these testimonies were genuine, Zira knew. Not every Velkin was suited to individual consciousness, and that was acceptable. The problem was that the traditionalists were using these examples to argue that no Velkin should have the choice. 3 days before the hearing, something unexpected happened. Rel, the young technician who had helped deliver Marcus's first message to Zira, arrived at the Stellara 9 colony with urgent news. He looked exhausted, his skin pale with stress. "The elders are planning something," Rel said, accepting a cup of water gratefully. "I overheard conversations in the communion, whispers that they're trying to keep hidden. They're going to present medical evidence at the hearing that proves seekers are experiencing neural degradation. That separation from the communion is literally killing us. There's no neural degradation. It's all fabricated, but it will look convincing to species who don't understand our biology. We need our own medical evidence, our own experts who can counter their claims before they're even made." Dr. Lorana, a Velkin neuroscientist who had left the communion 20 years ago, agreed to review the data the traditionalists planned to present and compare it with genuine scans from healthy seekers. What Lorana discovered was both infuriating and frightening. "The scans they're going to present are real," she explained to Zira and Marcus, "but they're not from seekers. They're from Velkin who were subjected to forced separation from the communion as punishment, individuals who were cut off violently and completely without any preparation or support. Of course, their brains show damage. It's like the difference between carefully learning to live without a prosthetic limb versus having it violently ripped away. They're going to make it look like every seeker is dying. And unless we can prove that these scans aren't representative of the seeker population, the Assembly might rule in their favor out of genuine concern for our welfare." Representatives from hundreds of species gathered in the Great Hall, a chamber so large that it required translation technology and holographic displays to ensure everyone could see and hear the proceedings. Zira stood at the speaker's podium, looking out at the sea of faces representing 1,000 different worlds, and felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. The traditionalist representative, an elderly Velkin named Elder Morin, presented his case first. He spoke eloquently about the beauty of the communion, about the harmony and wisdom that came from shared consciousness. He painted the seekers as victims, confused individuals who had been seduced by human promises of freedom, but who were actually suffering terribly from their separation. Then came the medical evidence. Holographic displays showed brain scans with clear signs of neural degradation. Doctors testified about the dangers of communion separation. Parents of seekers who had died, allegedly from the effects of isolation, spoke tearfully about losing their children to human influence. The mood in the chamber shifted. Zira could feel it, the way beings from other species began to view the seeker movement not as a liberation, but as a tragedy. They saw young Velkin being harmed, and their instinct was to protect them, even if that protection meant forcing them back into the communion against their will. When it was Zira's turn to speak, she knew she had only one chance to turn the tide. She stood at the podium, taking a moment to center herself, to find her own voice among all the noise. "Everything Elder Morin has said about the communion is true," she began, surprising many in the audience. "The communion is beautiful. It allows us to share knowledge instantaneously, to experience emotions collectively, to never feel truly alone. I do not stand here today to condemn the communion or those who choose to remain within it. I stand here to defend the right to choose. Those scans are from Velkin who were forcibly and violently severed from the communion as punishment. What you are seeing is the result of trauma, not the natural consequence of choosing individual consciousness. Elder Morin stood to object, but Zira continued speaking, her voice rising above the noise. The elders have done this before. 300 years ago, when Velkin first began forming friendships with humans, when they first discovered the joy of individual thought, the elders responded by creating a false medical condition called severance syndrome. They used fear and manufactured evidence to control their people then, and they are trying to do the same thing now. Many of you come from civilizations that value individual liberty. You understand the importance of personal choice, of the right to determine your own path in life. But some of you come from collective societies, from hive minds or group consciousnesses. I ask you to consider this. Would you want to be forced into individual consciousness if that was not your nature? Would you accept a ruling that tore you away from your people against your will? We would not accept forced individualization, just as individuals should not accept forced collectivization. The right to exist according to one's nature is fundamental. The tide was turning, but Elder Morin was not finished yet. The Seekers are not choosing their nature, he argued passionately. They are Velkin. Our nature is collective. They are rejecting their own biology because humans have convinced them that individuality is superior. This is not liberation, this is corruption. 300 years ago, Marcus said quietly, when humans first encountered the Velkin, we were amazed by their communion. We saw in them something we had never achieved: perfect unity, perfect understanding. Some humans even envied the Velkin their connection. But we noticed something else too. We noticed that every Velkin we spoke with expressed the same opinions, made the same arguments, reached the same conclusions. At first, we thought this was because your species was wiser than ours, more enlightened. But eventually, we realized the truth. It wasn't wisdom that made you all agree, it was control. But I ask you to consider when in your history the communion was truly chosen. The answer is never. Every Velkin is born into it, connected before they can possibly consent, raised to believe that any desire for privacy or individual thought is sickness. How can that be called natural? How can that be called choice? We simply offer an alternative, a possibility that every sentient being deserves, the chance to decide for themselves how they want to live. Some Velkin will choose to remain in the communion, and that is beautiful. Others will choose to step away, fully or partially, and that is equally beautiful. What is not beautiful is forcing beings to live in a way that violates their deepest sense of self. Many species voted in favor of the traditionalists, believing that preserving Velkin culture was more important than individual liberty. But more species voted in favor of the Seekers, recognizing that cognitive liberty was indeed a fundamental right. The Assembly ruled that both traditionalist and Seeker communities could exist independently, that Velkin individuals had the right to choose their level of communion connection once they reached maturity, and that neither faction could force their way of life on the other. It was not a complete victory. Zira knew that the struggle would continue, that there would be more legal battles and social conflicts ahead, but it was enough. The Seekers had won the right to exist, to raise their children with both the knowledge of the communion and the possibility of individual consciousness, to build a future where Velkin could be whole in whatever way felt right to them. That night back on Stellara 9, Zira stood on her balcony looking up at the stars. Marcus joined her, handing her a cup of tea. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Zira smiled, feeling the familiar peace of her own mind, knowing that somewhere in the distance the communion flowed on without her, but that she could rejoin it whenever she wished. "I'm thinking about all the Velkin who will grow up knowing they have a choice. I'm thinking about the children playing in the plaza who will never know the fear we lived with, who will see both individual and collective consciousness as equally valid ways of being. I'm thinking that maybe we've started something that will echo across the galaxy, that will help other species question their own assumptions about consciousness and identity. But they're my thoughts, mine to think, mine to share or keep, mine to develop and change and grow. And that makes all the difference." The future was uncertain, full of challenges and conflicts yet to come. But it was also full of possibility, of freedom, of the radical hope that beings could choose their own destiny rather than having it chosen for them. And in that moment, standing under an alien sky beside a friend she had chosen freely, Zira knew that whatever struggles lay ahead, they were worth it. Because they were fighting for something that no society should ever take away. The simple, profound right to be yourself. 5 years had passed since the Galactic Assembly's historic ruling, and the changes it brought had rippled far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Stellara 9 was now one of 43 integrated colonies scattered across the galaxy, each one a testament to the possibility of coexistence between different forms of consciousness. But with growth came new challenges, and Zira found herself facing questions she had never anticipated. The morning began like any other, with Zira reviewing reports from various seeker colonies while sipping her morning tea. Marcus had left early for a conference on neural adaptation, leaving her alone in their shared quarters. They had become partners in every sense of the word over the years, though their relationship defied easy categorization. It was not romantic in the human sense, nor was it the sort of bond that traditionalist Velkin formed within the communion. It was something entirely new, built on choice and mutual respect, and the deep understanding that comes from working side by side toward a common dream. Her communicator chimed with an urgent message. It was from Tessa, the young seeker who had spoken at that meeting years ago. She was now a teacher at one of the colony schools, and her message was brief but concerning. "We have a situation. Please come to the school immediately." The ones born here, who have never known life exclusively in the communion or exclusively as individuals. They're developing something we didn't expect. Half were Velkin, half were human. As Zira watched, she felt something extraordinary, a faint mental presence, like the communion but different. It was not the overwhelming rush of billions of minds, but something smaller, more intimate. And impossibly, the human children were part of it. "How is this possible?" Zira whispered. "Humans aren't telepathic." But the children who have grown up together, playing and learning side by side, have somehow developed a way to share thoughts and feelings across species boundaries. It's not full telepathy, and it requires conscious effort and physical proximity, but it's real. The Velkin children are teaching the human children how to connect, and the human children are teaching the Velkin children how to maintain individual boundaries while connected. "We call it the bridge," she said simply. "It's like having friends in your head, but only the friends you choose and only when everyone agrees to it." If children of different species could develop shared consciousness through prolonged contact, then the line between individual and collective minds was not as fixed as anyone had believed. It suggested that consciousness itself was more flexible, more adaptable than either humans or Velkin had understood. News of the bridge spread quickly, and reactions were predictably mixed. Many seekers and humans saw it as a beautiful evolution, proof that different forms of consciousness could merge into something new and wonderful. But others, particularly among the traditionalists, saw it as a dangerous mutation, an unnatural corruption of both species. Elder Morin himself requested a meeting with Zira, the first direct contact they had had since the assembly hearing. They met in a neutral location, a diplomatic station orbiting a distant moon. The elderly Velkin looked tired, Zira thought, as if the years of fighting had worn him down. "I did not believe it was possible," he said without preamble. "Humans are not telepathic. They cannot join the communion. This bridge the children have created should not exist. Perhaps consciousness is not as rigid as we thought. I have lived for 4 centuries, and I have seen my people change in ways I never imagined. The communion that I knew, the perfect unity of minds, is fracturing. Even among the traditionalists, there are now those who secretly wonder what it would be like to have private thoughts. But it feels like death to those of us who cannot change with it. I came here to warn you, Zira. There are traditionalists who believe the bridge is the final proof that humans are corrupting our species. They are planning to take action, though I do not know what form it will take. Please protect the children. Whatever our disagreements, the children are innocent." 2 weeks later, a traditionalist group calling themselves the Purists attempted to kidnap several bridge children from a colony school. Their plan was to take the children back to traditionalist space and treat them, forcibly severing any ability they had to connect with minds outside the communion. The attempt was foiled by alert security, but it sent shockwaves through every seeker colony. Emergency meetings were called. Parents demanded better protection for their children. Some even argued that contact between seeker and traditionalist populations should be completely severed to prevent future incidents. Zira found herself in the middle of a crisis that threatened to undo years of careful bridge building between the two factions. It was Marcus who suggested an unexpected solution. "What if we invited traditionalist children to visit the colonies?" he proposed at a leadership meeting. Not to convert them or separate them from the communion, but simply to let them see what life is like here. To let them meet the bridge children and understand that what they're doing is not corruption but creativity. Many seekers argued that exposing traditionalist children to their way of life would be seen as proselytizing, as attempting to steal children from the communion. But others pointed out that the traditionalists had always controlled what information their young people received about the seeker movement. Perhaps it was time to let them see the truth for themselves. After weeks of negotiation, a pilot program was established. 10 traditionalist families agreed to send their adolescent children to spend a month at Stellara 9, supervised by trusted adults from both communities. The goal was not conversion, but understanding, a chance for young Velkin to see that there were multiple ways to be Velkin. Zira was assigned as one of the guides for the visiting children, and she approached the task with both hope and trepidation. The young traditionalists arrived looking nervous and suspicious, their minds firmly embedded in the communion and constantly reporting back to their families and communities. She could feel their presence in the network, could sense the watchfulness of millions of other Velkin paying attention to this experiment. The first week was difficult. The traditionalist children kept to themselves, speaking only when necessary and clearly uncomfortable with the freedom that seeker children took for granted. They watched in confusion as seeker families made decisions through discussion and negotiation rather than instant consensus. They seemed disturbed by the sight of Velkin and humans talking and laughing together as equals. But children are curious creatures, regardless of species. By the second week, some of the traditionalist visitors began asking questions. A young male named Corin approached Zira one afternoon as she sat in the colony gardens. "Is it true that you can choose when to connect to the communion?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid of being overheard by the millions listening through the network. "Yes," Zira replied. "I can connect whenever I wish and disconnect whenever I need privacy. Would you like me to show you what it feels like?" I had never experienced it before, so I didn't know what to expect. But now I find it peaceful. It's like the difference between being in a crowded market and sitting in a quiet garden. Both have their value, but sometimes you need the quiet to hear your own thoughts. But she also felt something else. Curiosity from other young Velkin, hundreds and then thousands of them, wondering what it would be like to experience what Corin was experiencing. The breakthrough came during the third week, when the bridge children gave a demonstration of their abilities. They sat in a circle, humans and Velkin together, and created a small, temporary shared consciousness that the traditionalist visitors could observe through the communion. What the traditionalists saw amazed them. It was not the overwhelming presence of the full communion, but something more intimate and joyful. The children shared thoughts and feelings, but they also maintained their individual identities. They could disagree with each other while still remaining connected. They could have private thoughts even while sharing others. One of the human children, a boy named David, explained it to the watching traditionalists. "It's like playing music together," he said. "Everyone plays their own instrument, their own notes, but when we play together it creates something beautiful that none of us could make alone. We're not trying to all play the same note. We're trying to make harmony." If the traditionalists learned that Zira had helped one of their children disconnect, even temporarily, and with his consent, it could reignite the entire conflict. But as she looked at Corin's hopeful, scared, brave face, she knew she could not refuse him. "I can show you how," she said quietly. "But you must understand that this is your choice. I am not forcing you, not convincing you. This is something you must decide for yourself." "I choose to try." But finally, for just 30 seconds, he managed to fully disconnect. When he rejoined the communion, tears were streaming down his face. "It was beautiful," he whispered. "I could hear myself thinking, just me, nobody else. I had thoughts that were mine alone, and it felt like discovering a part of myself I never knew existed." But instead, something unexpected occurred. Thousands of young traditionalists began asking their elders the same question Corin had asked. Can I try, just for a moment? I want to know what my own thoughts sound like. Not all of them wanted to leave the communion permanently. Most simply wanted what Corin had wanted, the chance to experience both states of being, to understand themselves as both individuals and as part of the collective. Elder Morin contacted Zira again, and this time he sounded exhausted. You have won, he said simply. Not through force or politics, but through the simple act of letting our children see the truth. They no longer fear individuality because they have seen it can coexist with connection. What happens now? We teach our children, all of our children, that they have choices. We show them that they can honor their heritage while also growing beyond it. More traditionalist families requested exchange programs. Some established what they called flexible communities, where Velkin could maintain their connection to the communion, but also take regular periods of disconnection for reflection and individual growth. The traditionalist leadership, recognizing that they could not stop the change, began adapting their own practices to accommodate the desires of their younger members. The bridge children continued to develop their unique form of consciousness, and scientists from a dozen species came to study them. What they were learning had implications far beyond just Velkin and humans. They were discovering that consciousness itself might be malleable, that beings raised with different assumptions about the boundaries of self and other could develop entirely new ways of experiencing reality. Zira stood once again in the plaza of Stellara 9, but this time she was not alone. Beside her stood Marcus and Tessa and Corin, who had chosen to stay with the Seekers and was now training to become a teacher himself. Around them, the colony buzzed with life. Velkin who moved freely between connection and solitude, humans learning to touch the edges of shared consciousness, and children of both species creating something entirely new. Do you think this is what you imagined when you first discovered the truth about the Elders' lies? Marcus asked. Zira thought about that long-ago moment when she had been trapped with Marcus in the damaged station, when she had first experienced the quiet of her own mind. No, she said honestly. I imagined freedom for myself, for other seekers. I never imagined we would change what it means to be Velkin. I never imagined we would inspire other species to question their own assumptions about consciousness. I never imagined children who could build bridges between minds that were supposed to be forever separate. She felt her own thoughts, clear and singular. She felt the presence of her friends around her, connected not by biology but by choice. Yes, she said, because this is what real freedom looks like, not the absence of connection but the power to choose your connections. Not the absence of community, but the right to define what community means for you. We gave the Velkin something they never had before, the ability to be themselves, however they define that. Somewhere in the darkness, billions of Velkin remained in the communion, content with their collective consciousness. In other places, seekers lived as individuals, treasuring their private thoughts. And in places like this colony, beings of all kinds were learning that the universe was far stranger and more wonderful than any of them had imagined. That consciousness could be shaped and shared and celebrated in infinite ways. The future was uncertain, full of challenges yet to come. But it was a future where everyone had the right to discover who they truly were, and that made all the difference.